Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Future of Identity, Credential, and Access Management in Government, sponsored by Duo Security on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Brian Rosensteel, a cybersecurity architect for public sector at Cisco, Rob Hankinson, the acting director of the Office of Information Technology Infrastructure at the Department of State, Rob Birchmeyer, the Identity, Credential, and Access Management lead at the Marshall Space Flight Center for NASA, Jordan Burris, the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Federal CIO in the Office of Management and Budget, and Sam Youssef, the Deputy Director of the Defense Manpower Data Center in the Defense Department. Jordan, I'm going to come back to you because we've talked a lot about the progress agencies have made. We've talked a lot about how there's this recognition of the importance of identity management, especially as agencies move towards zero trust. Where do you see this evolving over the next year, 2, 3 years from now around identity access management? And if you want to dig deep into NIST 201-3, feel free.
Absolutely. So, I can start off with, to your point on progress, right? The progress that we have seen. I think we've seen a lot in terms of how agencies are delivering their mission. We've seen a lot in what they're doing for the users at the end of the day. I think one area that we're looking to continue to see progress and where we'll be working with agencies closely and is what they're doing in terms of managing identity for, we're going to say, non-person entities, automated tools, technology, robotic process automation, those types of things. And the reason being is because very much they're synonymous with the activity that we see on the network is very similar to that we would see of a user at the end of the day. And I think it's one thing we called out in 1917 was the need to be able to manage identities and credentials around those entities. I think one thing we also did within 1917 without necessarily calling it zero trust was talk about shifting the operating model beyond the perimeter, right? And for us, that really means about starting to look at, how we're managing access to data, how we're managing in it a way where we don't look at agency networks or environment as the traditional, castle and moat. And instead, we're looking at it for more of, an operational construct where it can kind of be anywhere. And we're really verifying all interactions or access points that connect to an agency's data at the end of the day. I think for us, when we're looking at the standards piece, since you mentioned it, we did make a call out in 1917 for NIST going through the process of updating their standards and guidance. And what really we were intending to do with that really was take the standpoint of like, hey, we're reframing the foundational elements. We understand that agencies need the standards to also move and evolve. We put inside the memo opportunities for continuous updates, such things as adapting the government's approach to HSPD 12 and doing that in an iterative manner. With FIPS 201, which had recently gone through public comment, one of the things we were intending to do is push for more identity federation between agencies, such that it was easier to engage in what we would say a collaborative digital environment versus having to go on site in order to have a meeting or access resources from one agency. We also wanted to set a stronger framework, if you will, for how we could eventually shift and mature the types of credentials that we use. And Sam talked about being able to do the traditional CAC card or things like that in more of a digital manner, or have credentials available in more of a digital manner. We were intending that. NIST 800-157, which talks about derived credentials, would be updated to go beyond just where it is today with PKI-based technology, but then also look towards where we could be using other types of technology and really managing around identity as a premise and not necessarily the PIV card. The two are very much interlinked, but I think for us, we're trying to get agencies back to, identity as core, and then we have, the credentials and access, other credentials that we have to help them enable the work that they need to do.
And I'd love to jump in there because, Jordan, I think that's a perfect segue to a comment that was made, some years ago by the CIO that the common access card was going away. And it really just, shook everyone across the department, and certainly my agency, which issues the common access card. But I will say that premise was the right aspirational premise. It's that, what we're doing is focusing on the identity and the attributes and making the data available in a real-time fashion to make the authorization decisions that we need to make. The CAC is really just a byfactor of that process that needs to exist. And it's absolutely the right premise that we start looking and leaning toward those concepts of no longer needing a credential, right? Aspirationally, I think this is where you're forward leaning with your guidance at OMB, and at the agency level, absolutely where we want to head and need to head. Will the CAC ever go away? No, probably not, right? But the manner in which we need it will absolutely evolve over the years.
So if I could just add a little bit to that, and I'd love to hear that we're transitioning and pivoting off of that solid firm factor card that's being used everywhere. The Department of State, we've got doctors overseas, we've got sensors, we've got Internet of Things coming, we've got so many technology devices, and Jordan mentioned NPE, that we've got to be able to identify these and to make sure that they can be trusted. And not all of them can take a PKI-based credential loaded onto it. So having the flexibility to use other factors and multiple other factors and different attributes of that system to make a single decision, and whether or not a device or a person or anything at all should be accessing the network, and what privilege they have is going to be huge. So many days, so many times today, we have to find ways around or competing with technology and our needs, and balancing them across policy as well. I think the new FIPS coming out and the new documents coming out of NIST are going to be key policy drivers that enable this for us. We look forward to implementing YubiKeys and things like that going forward, and those non-PKI based credentials. Those are going to be huge. They're going to be helpful for our travel teams. They're going to be helpful for our doctors. They're going to be helpful for interagency support as we have our tenant agencies at our 270 locations around the world. We're really looking forward to the changes that are coming there.
Yeah, same thing at NASA. I mean, we rolled our own PIV-I equivalent type of card several years ago to support those individuals who don't qualify for a PIV or can't receive a PIV due to the 6-month restrictions and so on. So the ability to have additional credentials available via policy is going to be really tremendous for us. The thing we're struggling with right now is getting technology up to the level to be able to issue those, because there's a lot of upgrades we've got to go through, because and NASA is a little bit different than some of the other agencies, certainly not different than DoD, but the other agencies in the government, we're a go-it-own on our own PIV issuance. We don't use the GSA All Access card. We actually issue our own. So we have to maintain all that infrastructure, and we're getting those upgrades in place. We've already got them lined up to take place, so we can get those when policies are finalized. We can actually start issuing those additional credentials that will allow us to meet the need of the customers and the missions better.
Rob, real quick, just let me jump in. When you say you're struggling for the technology to catch up, is that just an internal thing to NASA, meaning you're trying to marry new technology with old, I'll use quotes here, systems, or is it something else?
No, so like our infrastructure that we do the issuance out of, like when we issue our badges, we've got a couple of key upgrades that we've got in the pipeline right now to be able to issue YubiKeys, for example. The current version we're at for our CMS doesn't do that, but that's, we've got it in our pipeline ready to go, and we're working to get those to that level to be able to issue it. As far as supporting it from a technology on the application end, that's something that we'll have to work through, obviously, as well, because some of those applications won't necessarily support that type of authentication.
Brian, give me a sense from Brian, jump in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everything that I hear, I always tell a story when people ask me, where's identity going? Where's authentication going? And I always say, well, to understand where it's going, we need to understand where it's been. In the last 10 years, we're about building the strongest enterprise grade authenticator we could. And we, had strong identity binding of that authenticator to an individual. I think we've done that. I think there's, when you look at how fast technology has moved and you look at how long physical smart cards have, been the predominant authenticator in use in the federal government, that's a testament to how successful we've been about creating that authenticator. For the next 10 years are going to be about smarter, stronger, and more flexible authentication. As we've seen mobile devices becoming more secure, as we've seen the cryptographic chips and elements embedded on those devices gaining increasing security and sophistication, beginning to rival that of physical smart cards, as we've seen the needs of mission and the networks diversifying. Jordan talked about moving beyond the perimeter. In many ways, I ask people, well, where is your perimeter today? Can you even define it? How do you define it? And we realize a central concept in all of this is, well, through the lens of authentication, we can see a commonality of where users are flowing, where data is flowing. Then we can kind of get a sense of what that perimeter is. And we may understand, as others have said, we need to have more flexibility in the authenticators that we're leveraging as a part of that authentication workflow. That authentication workflow is going to be more than just presenting of one type of factor or authenticator in that authentication. So yeah, that's exactly what we are seeing. The other part about this too that was mentioned, it was about understanding that we need to centralize the way that we handle some of our ICAM, some of that management. And that, again, is decoupling away just from a single authenticator and looking at it broad scope authentication. Rob from State talked earlier, and this is true across most of the federal government that I've worked with, is the fragmentation of even the credentials themselves and how they're issued and how they're managed and the IT infrastructure. We know that's going to need to change to be able to consolidate, especially when we look forward to zero trust. Zero trust is going to have us having policy enforcement points and these different attributes. We're going to need to have some sort of centralization, and identity is going to be at the core of that. And so we're going to need to rethink the way that we've gone around some of our issuance and some of our management in these systems in order to be able to embrace that and move forward with that type of best practice in architecture.
I want to go back to something that Jordan said, because I think this is fascinating. It's zero trust. We'll get down that path in a second. But the other piece of it is the non-human, the RPAs, right? The bots who are doing work. And I think that's another big piece of this. And Jordan, I came across a playbook put out by GSA, and I had to read through it twice because I was like, oh, this is identity management playbook. Oh no, it's a non-person entity identity management playbook. And I just thought that was a fascinating description of how that works. Is that something, I know DoD, NASA, anyone, are you all starting to kind of, I know NASA, for instance, has been a leader with RPA and bots. Is that playing into kind of how you're looking at the way identity management is going to change and continue to change?
Yeah, so at NASA, we've been working with coming up with that digital identity for an NPE device or a bot looks like. So we've recently deployed the capability, and you have to take all the OMB mandates and kind of marry them into how do you have an identity when you actually have to have a proxy identity for it? Somebody has to own that identity that isn't the identity doing the work. So there's a lot of interpretation of all those policies, and how do we get them into the right IAL and AAL? So we still want to get an AAL3, but how do you do that? So we've implemented an HSM solution that some of the applications that actually manage the bots or do the bot work, scheduling and so on, can support, but some can't. So there's I think Rob had said it earlier about how we struggle with what the policy requirements are. How would we get the mission done, and how do we kind of marry those together? And we have to make compromises from time to time, and put in compensating controls to be able to accomplish that. So going forward, it would be nice in a perfect world if we could have all those policies just line up and all the technology was there and everything just worked the way the policy says. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't. And we worked in the RPA playbook. I think I participated in some of those discussions. And it was very helpful to see the other agencies going through the same situation we were and coming to a lot of the same conclusions that we did as far as how we handled those.
I love what you said, Rob. Sometimes we wish the policy would marry up with the technology, which would marry up with the way things are done, and then things would be easy. So appreciate that. The perfect.
We always look at it as the policy sets the bar, and that we expect that industry will try to catch up to the bar. And there always seem to be lagging in doing it. And that's no hit on industry, right? That's just the fact. That's how life is. We have to wait for those things to come out, so then industry can try to figure out how do we accommodate that.
And that's been a common refrain around cybersecurity, around a lot of technology. So you're absolutely right. Let's jump to a break, and then we'll come back. We can continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Future of Identity, Credential, and Access Management in Government, sponsored by Duo Security on Federal News Network.